The tow truck's chain tightened with a sharp metallic squeal, and the orphan girl's whole world lurched forward on 4 tired tires. Lila Hart ran alongside the faded blue sedan, her sedan, the only thing her parents left behind, her hands outstretched like she could hold a moving car back with bare palms. "Please," she cried, voice cracking in the cold air that smelled like diesel and wet asphalt. "That's my home. Please, I just need 2 minutes." The driver didn't even look down. He stared straight ahead like her tears were just another drizzle on the windshield. Behind the fence of the impound lot, the manager stepped out of a small office with bright lights and clean windows. Mark Carver had a pressed jacket and a face that stayed calm no matter what. He lifted a clipboard like it was a shield. "You can talk to the office," he called, bored. "If you don't have the fee, you don't have the car." Lila's throat burned. The car wasn't just a car. It was the place she folded her school uniform so it wouldn't wrinkle. The place she hid a jar of peanut butter and a spoon. The place she kept the last voice message from her mother saved on an old phone. Where would she sleep tonight when the wind already cut through her thin hoodie? And what would happen to the one thing in the glove box her father told her never to lose? Something he'd whispered about on his last night, when his hands were shaking and his smile was trying too hard. This story is a dramatized recreation, with some details adapted, but the choices and consequences remain true to the heart of what happened. Lila stumbled to the gate as the car rolled deeper into the lot, swallowed by rows of vehicles with flat tires and faded stickers, all of them looking like abandoned lives. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal bars. The manager finally walked closer, close enough for her to see the small gold ring on his finger and the coffee stain on his sleeve. "Sir," she begged, quieter now, trying not to sound desperate even though she was. "Let me grab my blanket and my bag. I can find the money. I can work it off. Just let me take my things." His eyes flicked past her shoulder toward the street. "You shouldn't have been living in a car," he said, like that settled everything. "Rules are rules." Lila's tears fell anyway, hot against the freezing air. Then, as the tow truck's beeping faded, the manager's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and the color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, and for the first time all day, Mark Carver didn't look in control. By sunset, the streetlights blinked on like tired eyes, and the orphan girl sat on the curb with her backpack hugged to her chest because it was the only thing left that was truly hers. Lila had learned to measure life in small weights, the weight of a granola bar in her pocket, the weight of coins in a jar, the weight of a blanket that smelled faintly of the old car seat and laundry soap from the shelter. Before the tow truck came, her routine had been painfully careful. She woke before dawn in the back seat, so security guards wouldn't see fog on the windows. She brushed her teeth in a gas station bathroom, splashing water on her face and trying to look like a normal girl on her way to school. She worked afternoons at a diner, where the grill hissed and the air smelled like fries and onions, where she pretended the warmth was enough to fill her up. She kept her grades up because her parents had died believing she could build a better life, and she couldn't stand the thought of their sacrifice turning into nothing. But she had one private fear she never spoke out loud, that if she lost the car, she would lose the last place that still felt like her parents had been real, not just a story other people pitied. That morning, before everything fell apart, she had made a choice that now felt like a bruise on her heart. At the bus stop, an old woman with silver hair and a worn coat had fumbled with her purse, hands shaking, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm short," the woman murmured, eyes down. "Just a little. I don't know what I did with my card." The driver sighed loudly. People in line shifted, annoyed. Lila's fingers closed around the last bills in her pocket, the exact money she'd planned to put toward the impound fee she'd been saving for weeks. She could have turned away. No one would have blamed her. Yet she heard her mother's voice in her head, soft but steady. Kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you. So Lila stepped forward and pressed the money into the slot. "I've got it," she said quickly, before she could change her mind. The old woman looked up, startled, eyes bright as if she might cry. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "you don't have to—" "It's okay," Lila lied, smiling even as panic tightened in her stomach. The bus doors closed with a sigh, and Lila stepped back onto the sidewalk, choosing the long walk to save her own fare. Why would an orphan girl who had so little give away the one thing she needed most? because she couldn't bear to watch someone else be left behind, not when she knew what that felt like. The question she couldn't answer, yet, was why the old woman kept looking back through the bus window, not with simple gratitude, but with a focus that felt almost like recognition. And as Lila sat on the curb now, shivering, she didn't see the black car that had parked across the street, or the quiet figure inside watching her with hands clasped tightly, as if holding back a storm of decisions. By morning, the orphan girl's eyes were gritty from a night spent under an awning outside a closed bakery, the smell of stale sugar teasing her, while her stomach cramped with hunger. She washed up in a public restroom, smoothing her hair with damp hands, trying to look like someone who belonged in daylight. She went to the impound lot with her shoulders squared, rehearsing polite words in her head, because she'd learned that anger got you labeled, and labels got you nowhere. Inside the office, the air smelled like printer ink and cheap air freshener. A TV on the wall played a talk show at low volume, laughter floating around like it didn't know what suffering sounded like. Mark Carver barely glanced up. "Fees gone up," he said, tapping his clipboard. "Storage, tow, admin, late penalties." He slid a paper toward her, and the number on it made her chest go tight. "I don't have that," Lila whispered, "but I can pay some today. I can set up a plan. I work at the corner diner, I can bring—" He cut her off with a short laugh. "Plans are for people with credit," he said. "You're not a person with credit." Behind her, two men in clean jackets snickered as they waited for their own paperwork, and Lila felt heat crawl up her neck. She wanted to scream that she was a person, that she was trying, that she hadn't chosen any of this. Instead, she swallowed and asked the only thing she could. "Can I at least get my school bag from the car? My blanket, my documents?" Mark's gaze sharpened for a second, like the word documents carried weight he didn't want to touch. "Nope," he said too fast. "Liability." Lila stared at him. Why would a manager care about a teenager's documents? And why had he paled at that phone call yesterday like someone had whispered a name that scared him? She turned and walked out before her tears could fall in front of them. But she didn't give up. She went to the city office, waited under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired, and begged a clerk for help. The clerk, a woman with a chipped nail and a soft voice, finally leaned in. "If you can prove hardship, sometimes they extend the auction date," she murmured. "But you didn't hear it from me." A small victory, an extra day, should have felt like hope. Instead, when Lila returned to the lot to hand over the form, Mark's jaw clenched. "Cute," he said, reading it. "Still doesn't change the rules here." He stamped it anyway, harder than necessary. "Auction's tomorrow evening now," he added, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "So you've got one day to become a miracle. One day. One day before her home, her memories, her father's whispered secret disappeared into someone else's hands." That night, as the city cooled and the streets emptied, Lila stood across from the lot fence, staring at the shadowy rows of cars. She knew it was wrong to go in. She also knew it was worse to do nothing. What would she risk? Arrest, humiliation, the last scraps of dignity, just to retrieve what mattered. Her hands trembled as she found a loose section of chain link near the back and pushed, heart pounding, until a narrow gap opened. Then she slipped into the lot, the gravel crunching under her shoes like an alarm, and the darkness swallowed her whole. The orphan girl moved between cars like a ghost, ducking low when a security light flickered, her breath loud in her own ears. The lot was a different world at night, quiet, cold, filled with the soft ticking sounds of cooling metal and distant traffic. Lila found her sedan by the cracked sticker on the rear window, her throat tightening when she saw it sitting there like it had already given up. She rushed to the driver's side and tried the handle. Locked. Of course. Her fingers felt for the spare key she used to keep taped under the bumper, but she'd removed it months ago after someone tried to break into her home on wheels. She pressed her forehead to the glass, and through the windshield, she could see her blanket, her notebooks, her mother's scarf folded on the passenger seat, close enough to touch, impossibly far. She glanced around, desperate. Could she break a window? She imagined the crash, the alarm, police lights, handcuffs on thin wrists. She couldn't do it. Then she remembered something her father had taught her when she was little, when he'd been fixing the car with grease on his cheek and laughter in his eyes. "Cars keep secrets," he'd said, tapping the dashboard. "They don't just move people, they hide stories." Her heart pounded harder as she reached down, fingers sliding under the edge of the license plate frame. There, tucked behind it, was a slim metal strip, an old trick he'd shown her for emergencies. With shaking hands, she slid it into the top of the window seam and tried to coax the lock. It almost worked. Almost. A sharp flashlight beam sliced across the lot. "Hey!" a voice barked. "Hands where I can see them!" Lila froze, panic exploding inside her. She lifted her hands slowly, palms out, and stepped back from the car. The guard approached, heavy boots crunching gravel, suspicion tightening his face when he saw she was just a girl. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "This is trespassing." Lila swallowed hard. "That's my car," she said, voice trembling. "I live in it. They won't let me get my things." The guard's eyes flicked to the manager's office, then back to her, and something like discomfort crossed his face. "Not my problem," he muttered, but his grip on the flashlight loosened. Before he could decide what to do, Mark Carver emerged from the office door, already angry, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. "Of course it's you," he snapped. "You just can't follow rules, can you?" Lila flinched. "I just need my documents," she pleaded. "My dad, he—" Mark stepped closer, and his voice dropped. "Don't say that," he hissed, eyes sharp. "Don't say anything about your dad here." The orphan girl blinked, confused. Why would her father's name matter to this man? And what did Mark know that he didn't want spoken out loud in the dark? Then Mark's phone rang again, cutting through the night like a blade. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale in the flashlight glow. This time he answered. "Yes," he said, suddenly respectful. "No, I didn't realize. I can fix it." Lila watched him, heart racing, as his eyes lifted to her with a new kind of fear. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "You need to come with me," he said to Lila, voice tight. "Right now." She didn't know if that meant help or trouble, and as the guard reached for her elbow, she realized she might be walking into something much bigger than a towed car. Inside the office, the warmth hit Lila's skin like a cruel reminder of everything she didn't have. Mark Carver paced behind the counter, running a hand through his hair, the confident manager gone, replaced by a man who looked like his world had tilted. "Sit," he said, but it sounded more like he was trying to steady himself than control her. Lila stayed standing, clutching her backpack strap so hard her knuckles hurt. "What is happening?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why do you keep getting calls that make you look like you've seen a ghost?" Mark stared at her, then at the camera in the corner and lowered his voice. "You didn't tell me your last name yesterday," he muttered. "Hart." He said it like it tasted dangerous. Lila's stomach dropped. "That's my name," she said. "Why does it matter?" He swallowed. "Because Row Legal just called," he said, and the way he said it made the room feel smaller. "And when Row Legal calls, people listen." Lila's mind raced. Row. She'd heard that name once, on a building downtown with shiny glass and a foundation logo. "Who?" she began. The office door opened, and a woman walked in without knocking, wearing a simple coat that still looked expensive because it sat perfectly on her shoulders. Silver hair, calm eyes. The old woman from the bus stop. She looked at Lila, and her expression softened in a way that made Lila's throat tighten. "Hello again, sweetheart," the woman said gently. "I was hoping I'd find you before they did." Lila's mouth went dry. "You," she whispered. You're the lady from the bus." The woman nodded. "My name is Lydia Rowe," she said, as if it was nothing more than a name. Mark Carver stiffened like a soldier. Lila's knees felt weak. Lydia Rowe, the billionaire whose foundation put its name on hospitals, scholarships, and whole wings of the city's museum. Why would someone like that ride a bus and need fare? And why would she be here in a grimy impound office, looking at an orphan girl like she mattered? Lydia's gaze moved to Mark. "You towed her home," Lydia said, voice quiet but sharp underneath. "And you refused to let her retrieve her belongings." Mark's lips parted, but no excuse came out. Lydia turned back to Lila. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she said. "And you didn't know who I was, which is why it meant something." Lila's eyes stung. "I didn't do it for anything," she whispered. Lydia nodded, as if that was exactly the point. "I believe you," Lydia said. "Now tell me the truth. Why is that car more than a place to sleep?" Lila hesitated, fear and hope tangling together. She could tell Lydia something was hidden. something her father had warned her about. But could she trust this powerful stranger? Before she could answer, the office phone rang again. Mark grabbed it, listened, and his face twisted. "Yes, sir," he said, voice shaking. "I understand." He hung up and looked at Lydia and Lila like a trapped man. "Someone filed a claim," he whispered. "A man named Victor Harlan says that car contains company property, and the girl's parents stole it." Lila's heart slammed in her chest. Her parents? Thieves? That couldn't be true. Lydia's eyes narrowed, and in that moment, Lila understood the new risk. She wasn't just fighting fees anymore. She was fighting a powerful man's story, and his story could crush her. Lydia leaned closer to Lila and said softly, "Whatever your father hid, they're coming for it." Then the door opened again and two uniformed officers stepped inside, one of them looking straight at Lila. "Lila Hart?" the officer asked. "We need you to come with us." The orphan girl's wrists weren't cuffed, but it still felt like being arrested. People stared as she walked out, drivers, clerks, a man buying a soda, eyes sliding over her like she was already guilty. In the back of the police car, the seat smelled like vinyl and old sweat, and Lila pressed her hands together in her lap to stop them shaking. At the station, a detective with tired eyes asked questions that sounded like traps. "Where did your parents work? Did they ever bring anything home?" "Did you know Victor Harlan?" Lila answered honestly, because it was all she had. Her parents had worked at Harlan Systems, a huge company that did contracts and built things she didn't understand. Victor Harlan was a name she'd seen on plaques, the kind of name that sat above people, not beside them. "My dad didn't steal," she said, voice tight. "He fixed things. He taught me to be careful. He was scared before he died, but he wasn't a thief." The detective watched her for a long moment. "Being scared doesn't make someone innocent," he said, but his tone wasn't cruel, just heavy. Lila wondered if anyone would ever believe an orphan girl over a billionaire with lawyers. Would she lose her job at the diner if the police called? Would the shelter turn her away if they heard the word investigation? One question was answered sooner than she wanted. When she returned to the diner for her shift, the manager pulled her aside near the dish sink where the air was thick with soap and steam. "Lila," he said, avoiding her eyes, "I can't have trouble seeing my customers." She felt the floor tilt. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." He sighed. "I know you're a good kid," he said, and that made it worse. "But good doesn't pay my insurance." He handed her an envelope with a small amount of cash and wouldn't meet her gaze. Fired. Just like that. Lila walked out into the cold with the envelope crumpled in her fist, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt. Outside the shelter that night, the intake worker frowned at her name. "Police?" the woman asked, suspicious. Lila's stomach dropped. She was going to lose even the thin mattress and the safe walls. Then a social worker stepped forward, a woman named Marisol Reyes, with gentle eyes and a voice that didn't rise when she spoke. "She can stay," Ms. Reyes said firmly. "I'll sign for her." The intake worker hesitated, then shrugged. Lila exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. At least she had one place to lay her head. But hope stayed small, because fear had teeth. Later, in the quiet of the shelter hallway, Ms. Reyes handed Lila a paper cup of tea that smelled like chamomile. "Someone powerful is pushing this," Ms. Reyes said softly. "But I've seen kids like you get crushed when they stay silent." Lila's eyes burned. "I don't even know what they want," she whispered. Ms. Reyes leaned in. "Then we find out," she said, "and we do it the right way." As if on cue, Lila's old phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. One sentence, no greeting, no explanation, just a threat that made her blood run cold. "Stop digging or you'll lose what little you have left." Lila stared at the screen, tea forgotten, and realized the next choice she made could decide whether she survived this, because someone was watching, and they weren't afraid to scare an orphan girl into silence. The next morning, Lydia Rowe met Lila outside a modest law office that smelled like polished wood and fresh paper, a world away from the greasy impound lot. Lydia didn't look like someone who needed anyone's approval, yet her eyes softened every time they landed on Lila, as if she saw the girl behind the fear. "I can't promise this will be easy," Lydia said as they walked in, "but I can promise you won't face it alone." Lila wanted to believe her. She also feared what believing might cost. In a conference room, Lydia's attorney laid out the truth like pieces of a puzzle. Victor Harlan had filed an emergency claim, trying to label the car as evidence of theft. The city, eager to avoid conflict with a powerful contractor, had moved fast. Too fast. "They're using the system like a hammer," the attorney said. "And you're the nail." Lila swallowed hard. "Why?" she asked. "Why do they care about a car?" Lydia's gaze turned distant for a moment. "Because your parents weren't just employees," she said quietly. "Your father contacted my foundation months before he died. He wanted protection." Lila's breath caught. "My dad knew you?" she whispered. Lydia nodded once. "He tried," she said, "but he disappeared before our meeting." Lila's mind spun. Had her father been trying to expose something? Had he hidden something in the car because he didn't trust anywhere else? The attorney slid a small court order across the table. "We can get temporary access to retrieve personal belongings," he said, "but we have to move carefully. If there's something inside that belongs in an investigation, we don't touch it alone." Lila's hands trembled. "My father told me there was something in the glove box," she admitted, voice barely audible. "He said, if anything happens, don't let them take it." I didn't know what he meant. Lydia's eyes sharpened, not with greed, but with urgency. "Then we retrieve your belongings," she said. "And we document everything." Lila wanted to ask the biggest question. Who killed her parents, Ma? But she couldn't bear the answer if it came too fast. Instead, she asked, "Can they really accuse my parents like this and get away with it?" Lydia's mouth tightened. "They can try," she said. "Victor Harlan has money and friends." One question was answered when Lydia's attorney got a call and put it on speaker. A city clerk confirmed the auction had been halted temporarily under legal review. Lila exhaled, shaky with relief. The car wouldn't be sold tonight, but the second question, what exactly was Victor afraid of, hung in the air like smoke. As Lila and Lydia left the office, a man in a dark coat stood across the street pretending to look at his phone. Lila felt his eyes on her anyway. Lydia followed Lila's glance and said softly, "Do you see him?" Lila nodded, throat tight. Lydia's voice went colder. "That means we're not just racing paperwork," she murmured. "We're racing people." A black SUV rolled slowly past the curb, windows tinted, and Lila felt the fear from the text message settle into her bones. When she looked down, her phone buzzed again, this time with a photo of the shelter entrance taken from across the street. No words, just proof. Lila's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the phone, and Lydia's grip tightened on her arm. "We're moving you," Lydia said, decision hardening in her voice. "Tonight." Lila's heart pounded. Leaving the shelter meant losing the only familiar place she had left, but staying might mean putting everyone there in danger. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, realizing she had run out of safe choices. Lydia brought the orphan girl to a small apartment above a quiet bakery, the kind of place that smelled like warm bread, even through closed doors. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean, and the windows locked, and for the first time in months, Lila slept without listening for footsteps outside her car. In the morning, Lydia's attorney arrived with two things, the court order for retrieval and a stern reminder. "We walk in legally," he said. "We record. We don't provoke." Lila nodded, though her stomach felt like a knot. When they reached the impound lot, Mark Carver looked like a man who hadn't slept. His eyes flicked to Lydia like he feared her shadow. "I'm cooperating," he blurted before anyone spoke. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Lila watched him and felt a strange mix of anger and pity. He'd treated her like dirt yesterday. Now he could barely meet her eyes. Lydia's attorney presented the order, and for the first time Mark unlocked the gate without a smug comment. As they approached the sedan, Lila's chest tightened. There it was, the place she had whispered her prayers, the place she had cried silently so no one would hear, the place she had promised her parents she'd keep going. The attorney filmed as Lila opened the door and reached inside, hands shaking as she gathered her blanket and her notebooks. The car smelled like stale air and faint vanilla from an old air freshener, a smell that made her throat ache with memory. "Glove box," she murmured, and Mark flinched at the words. Lila opened it carefully. Inside was a small envelope taped to the top, hidden where someone rushing might miss it. Her father's handwriting curved across the front. "Lila, only if I'm gone." Her vision blurred. She looked up at Lydia, who nodded gently. giving her permission without pushing. Lila peeled the tape and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. A folded letter fell out, along with a tiny silver key and a flash drive no bigger than her thumb. Lila's breath caught. "What is it?" she whispered, two questions colliding in her head at once. Was this the secret her father died protecting, and was Victor Harlan willing to ruin her life to get it back? One question answered itself as she unfolded the letter and saw the first line. "My brave girl. If you're reading this, it means the worst happened, and I'm sorry I couldn't stop it." Tears slipped down Lila's cheeks, but she forced herself to keep reading. Her father wrote about Harlan Systems dumping dangerous waste to cut costs, about forged reports, about bribes. He wrote that he had copied evidence because he couldn't live with what he'd seen. He wrote that he tried to bring it to Lydia Rowe's foundation because Lydia had funded whistleblower protection in the past. And he wrote one line that made Lila's stomach drop. "Victor Harlan already suspects I have the files. If he comes for you, trust Lydia." The power in the room shifted like air before a storm. Lydia's face went tight with controlled fury. The attorney took the flash drive carefully like it could bite. Mark Carver backed away, lips trembling. "I didn't know," he whispered again, voice cracking. "They told me to tow it. A guy from the city. He said it was routine." Lydia turned to him, eyes sharp. "Who?" she asked. Mark hesitated, then blurted a name. "Denton," he said. "City contracts. He said if I did it fast, I'd keep my permit." Lila stared at him, realizing the tow hadn't been random at all. It had been a net thrown at her. Then, outside the fence, an engine revved. A black SUV idled at the curb, and a man in a dark coat lifted a phone, filming. Lydia's attorney stiffened. "We need to leave," he said urgently. Lila clutched the letter to her chest, heart racing. She had the truth in her hands now, but having the truth didn't mean she was safe. As they hurried toward the exit, the SUV door opened and a tall man stepped out with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Lila Hart," he called warmly, as if they were old friends. "Mr. Harlan would like a word." The orphan girl's legs felt like stone, but Lydia moved first, placing herself between Lila and the man like a shield. "You're trespassing," Lydia said, voice calm. "This lot is under court restriction." The man's smile widened. "Oh, Ms. Rowe," he said smoothly. "Always protecting strays." Lila's cheeks burned, and she hated that her body reacted to his contempt like it mattered. The man held out a business card without stepping closer. "I'm here to help," he said, tone syrupy. Things can get messy when a child is holding something she doesn't understand. Lydia's attorney spoke, sharp and legal. "Any contact with the minor must go through counsel," he said. The man lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Of course," he said. "Then please pass along a message." He tilted his head toward Lila, eyes cold now. "Mr. Harlan is prepared to be generous," he said. "A scholarship, housing, a fresh start. All she has to do is return what belongs to the company." Lila's heart pounded. The offer glittered like sunlight on water, beautiful, until you realized it could drown you. Could she take the deal and finally sleep without fear? Could she accept comfort bought with her parents' silence? Lydia didn't answer for her. She simply looked at Lila, letting the orphan girl choose, because real help didn't steal your agency. Lila swallowed, fingers tightening on her father's letter. "My parents didn't steal," she said, voice shaking but clear. "They tried to stop harm." The man's eyes narrowed, and his kindness mask slipped for one sharp second. "Then you're choosing a fight you can't win," he said quietly, "and kids like you lose." He turned and walked back to the SUV, but before he got in, he added softly, "Watch who you trust. Even angels have budgets." The SUV rolled away, and Lila's knees almost buckled from the adrenaline. Lydia's hand steadied her elbow. "You did the right thing," Lydia murmured. Lila didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. That night, the fear became real. The bakery downstairs closed early, the scent of bread fading, and the apartment above went quiet. Lila sat at the small kitchen table while Lydia's attorney copied the flash drive, creating backups, locking originals in a safe case. Ms. Reyes called to check in, her voice warm, and Lila's throat tightened with gratitude that someone still cared. Then the building's lights flickered once, twice, and the hallway outside filled with unfamiliar footsteps. Lydia's security, Quiet professionals she hadn't even realized were there moved like shadows. A knock came, heavy and official. "Fire inspection," a voice called. Lydia's eyes narrowed. At this hour? Lila's pulse pounded in her ears. Was it a trick? Would they drag her out and take the evidence? Lydia's security checked a camera feed and stiffened. "2 men," one whispered. "No city badges." Lydia's attorney snapped the safe case shut. "We're moving now," he said. Lila's stomach dropped. She had barely started to feel safe. She looked at Lydia, eyes wide. "How far will they go?" she whispered. Lydia's jaw set. "As far as they think they need to," Lydia replied. "Which is why we stopped them first." In the stairwell, as they slipped out the back, Lila's phone buzzed with another message. But this one wasn't a threat. It was an unfamiliar email subject line forwarded by Lydia's attorney. "City Council emergency hearing. Harlan contract review. Tomorrow 9 a.m. Lila stared at it, breath catching. Tomorrow. The truth could come out in public, or it could get buried forever. Lydia looked at her and said, "If you're willing to speak, we can end this." Lila's mouth went dry. Speaking meant stepping into the light where powerful people could aim at her. Staying silent meant her parents' last act meant nothing. Lila nodded slowly, fear and resolve twisting together. "I'll speak," she whispered, and the decision felt like stepping off a ledge into air. Morning came with a grey sky and a city that looked the same, even though Lila's life felt like it was on fire. The council building smelled like polished stone and cold air conditioning, and the chairs in the hearing room were hard, made for people who didn't have to sit with fear in their stomachs. Lydia Rowe sat beside Lila, calm as a lighthouse, while Lydia's attorney arranged documents in neat stacks. Across the room, Victor Harlan arrived like he owned the oxygen. Tailored suit, confident stride, a few men trailing him who looked like they had never been told no in their lives. Lila had seen faces like his on billboards and news screens, smiling beside words like innovation and community. Up close, his eyes were flat. When he glanced at Lila, the corner of his mouth lifted, like he was amused that an orphan girl thought she could matter. The chairperson called the hearing to order, and city officials spoke in careful phrases. Victor's lawyer insisted the company was being targeted unfairly. A man named Denton from City Contracts sat stiffly, sweating under his collar. Lila felt her hands shaking under the table. Would her voice fail when it mattered most? Would anyone believe her, or would they hear "homeless orphan" and stop listening? One question answered itself when Lydia stood to speak. Her voice didn't need volume. It had gravity. "This is not about politics," Lydia said. "This is about harm." She presented the court order, the towing irregularities, the pattern of predatory impounds linked to city permits. Then she looked at the chairperson. "And it's about a young woman whose parents tried to do the right thing," Lydia added. Victor Harlan's smile tightened. "Is this really the forum for family tragedy?" he said smoothly, and a few people chuckled nervously like they were afraid not to. Lila's face burned. Lydia's gaze turned sharp. "It's the forum for truth," she said. Then the chairperson nodded toward Lila. "Miss Hart," she said, "we understand you have a statement." Lila stood. The room tilted. Her father's letter was in her pocket, folded and warm from being held too tightly. She spoke anyway, voice trembling at first, then stronger as she remembered the nights in the car. The hunger, the fear, the way Mark Carver had called her, not a person with credit. "My parents worked for Harlan Systems," she began. "They weren't thieves. They were scared because they found something wrong and tried to report it. My dad hid evidence because he thought if anything happened to them, I would be the only one left to protect it." Victor's lawyer rose. "Objection," he snapped. "Hearsay. Emotional manipulation." Lydia's attorney countered calmly, "We have documentation," and placed a sealed set of files on the clerk's desk. The chairperson frowned, leaning forward. "Is this the evidence you claim exists?" she asked. Lydia's attorney nodded. "And we have chain of custody, including the retrieval order," he said. Victor Harlan's expression didn't change, but Lila saw his hand tighten on the armrest. The flash drive was played on a secure screen. Emails, reports, numbers that made people's faces shift as the meaning landed. Denton's eyes darted around like a trapped animal. Mark Carver was called in next, looking sick. "I got a call," he admitted, voice cracking. They told me to tow the car fast. They said it was routine. The chairperson's eyes narrowed. Who told you? Mark swallowed and said, Denton. Denton stood up so quickly his chair scraped loud. That's a lie, he barked. But the room had changed. The air felt different now, heavier because the truth had shape. Lila's second question, would Victor escape with a smile and a handshake, started to unravel as the chairperson called for an investigation and the city attorney stood face grim. Victor Harlan finally rose, smoothing his suit like nothing could touch him. This is a misunderstanding, he said coolly. I won't allow my company to be dragged through mud by... He stopped mid-sentence when Lydia's attorney held up one final piece, a signed letter from Lila's father, naming Lydia Rose Foundation as temporary trustee of his whistleblower evidence and designating Lila as beneficiary of a protected support fund he had set up quietly in case he didn't make it home. Victor's eyes flicked to the signature, and for the first time, his mask cracked. The chairperson's voice turned icy. Mr. Harlan, she said, you will remain available to this council and the city attorney. Victor's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Victor's jaw clenched. Lila's heart hammered as she realized she had done it. She had spoken, and the room had listened. But justice wasn't finished. As officials moved to detain Denton for questioning and the hearing erupted into tense murmurs, Victor turned his head toward Lila and mouthed two silent words, smiling without warmth. You're done. And Lila understood the last cliff edge. Winning in a room didn't mean she was safe outside it. By the time the hearing ended, the city's polished halls buzzed with reporters, flashing lights and whispers that felt like wind trying to knock Lila over. Lydia kept close, guiding the orphan girl through the crowd, while security formed a quiet wall. Outside, winter air hit Lila's cheeks, and she realized she was shaking, not just from cold, but from the shock of surviving something huge. A reporter called her name, and she flinched because she wasn't used to being seen. Lydia leaned in. You don't owe anyone your pain, she murmured. You owe yourself your future. One question that had haunted Lila, whether anyone would believe her, was answered by the city attorney's press statement that afternoon. The investigation was official. Denton was suspended. The towing contracts tied to the scheme were frozen, and Harlan Systems' city deals were under review pending environmental audits. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where one speech fixed everything, but it was real consequences, the kind that make powerful people uncomfortable. Mark Carver, pale and sweating, met Lila at the impound lot later with the court release in hand. He avoided her eyes as he opened the gate. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough. I told myself it was business. I told myself people like you always land somewhere. Lila's throat tightened. We don't, she said softly, and the truth of it made his shoulders sag. He handed her the keys, her keys, like they weighed 100 pounds. Lila walked to the sedan and put her hand on the hood. The metal was cold, but the touch felt like coming home after being lost at sea. She climbed into the driver's seat and breathed in the familiar scent, the vanilla air freshener faint, but still there, like a ghost of normal life. Lydia stood a few steps away, watching with quiet pride. What will you do now? Lydia asked gently. It was a real question, not a test. Lila stared at the steering wheel, thinking about the scholarship offer that had been a trap, about the easy road she'd refused. The other question she still carried, how far justice would go, began to answer itself over the following days. Victor Harlan wasn't arrested on the spot, because the world doesn't handcuff power quickly, but subpoenas arrived. Auditors dug. Whistleblowers from inside the company began to come forward, emboldened by the fact that a homeless orphan girl had stood up and didn't disappear. Lydia's foundation offered legal protection to witnesses, and the city, embarrassed in public, moved faster than it ever moved for someone like Lila. Still, the victory had a cost. Lila couldn't return to invisible life. Her name was now attached to a storm. One evening, as she sat in her car parked legally outside the bakery apartment, a folded note appeared under her wiper. No signature, just a sentence that made her chest tighten. Some fights don't end when you win. She stared at it, fear trying to crawl back into her bones. Lydia read it, then calmly tore it in half. They want you to live scared, Lydia said, so you won't live fully. Lila swallowed. "What if they try again?" she whispered. Lydia's gaze was steady. "Then we keep the lights on," she replied, "and we build a life they can't tow away." Lila looked at her car keys in her palm, the metal glinting under the streetlight. She realized the last fight wasn't against Victor Harlan anymore. It was against the part of her that believed she was destined to lose. She closed her fist around the keys and made a decision that felt like planting her feet on solid ground. "I don't want just help," Lila said quietly. "I want to help others like me." Lydia's smile was small but real. "Then we start," she said, and Lila felt the story turning from survival into purpose. Spring arrived slowly, like the city was learning to breathe again, and the Orphan Girl's sedan stopped being a shelter and became something else, a symbol that she had made it through. Lila didn't wake up one morning magically healed. She still flinched at tow trucks. She still woke from dreams where chains tightened and her home rolled away. But she also started classes, auto tech at a community college program Lydia's foundation helped fund, because Lila had always been good with her hands, and learning felt like reclaiming what her father had given her. She worked part-time at a different diner, where the manager didn't ask questions in a suspicious voice, just said, "You show up, you work hard, you're welcome." Ms. Reyes visited often, bringing folders of housing options and celebrating every small step like it mattered, because it did. The first time Lila unlocked the door to her own tiny studio apartment, she stood still for a long time, listening to the silence. No engines outside the window, no footsteps in a shelter hallway, just quiet that belonged to her. She placed her mother's scarf in a drawer and her father's letter in a small box on the shelf, not hidden in fear anymore, but kept with respect. Lydia never tried to replace Lila's parents. She didn't call herself family. She simply showed up, at graduation ceremonies, at court updates. At the first day, Lila volunteered at a youth shelter to teach basic car care so kids wouldn't get stranded and exploited. One afternoon, Lila stood in the parking lot behind that shelter, watching a line of beat-up cars and listening to a teenager admit quietly, "I sleep in mine sometimes." Lila's chest tightened, but she didn't look away. She handed the kid a small toolkit and said, "Okay, then let's make sure it starts every time." Two questions hovered in her mind as she watched the kid's shoulders relax. Would she ever stop feeling like the ground could vanish beneath her? And could she turn her pain into something that actually protected people? One answer came in a simple, surprising way. The city, under pressure and public scrutiny, created a hardship waiver program for impounds and partnered with Lydia's foundation to fund emergency retrieval for people living in vehicles, because Lila had made them see what they'd ignored. It wasn't perfect, but it was something real, something that would keep other homes on wheels from disappearing overnight. The second answer came when Lila walked into the impound lot one last time, not to beg, but to donate a stack of printed guides on legal rights and local resources, a quiet act of defiance wrapped in practical kindness. Mark Carver was still there, but he looked different, older somehow. He accepted the stack without meeting her eyes. "I'm trying to do better," he said, voice low. Lila nodded. She didn't forgive him like it was nothing. She also didn't let bitterness own her. On her way out, she paused by the gate where she had cried, and she noticed something hanging from her keychain. A small metal hook, one she'd found on the ground the night her car was towed, the kind used to connect chains. She had kept it without knowing why, and now she did. It reminded her that what once dragged her life away could also become a reminder that she survived the pull. She climbed into her car, turned the key, and the engine started smooth and steady, like a promise. As she drove past the bus stop where she'd paid an old woman's fare, she saw a teenager hesitating with empty hands, and another person stepped forward to help without being asked. Lila smiled softly, hands warm on the wheel. If you've ever felt invisible, or if you've ever helped someone when it cost you, I'd love to hear what kept you going. Drop it in the comments and stay close, because stories like this remind us we're not alone.